Welcome to the Visible Art of Translation podcasts. This series of podcasts are part of the EU-funded INCREC project. Our focus is creativity, translation and technology in literary and audiovisual translation. Our goal with this series is to give visibility to the often invisible skills, role and voice of professional translators.
Today we are joined by Lía Moya, a seasoned audiovisual translator whose career spans over 2 decades in the Spanish film industry. With a background in journalism, Lía discovered her calling in audiovisual translation through her work at film festivals, initially as a programmer before moving into translation. She developed her skills at Filmoteca Española, where she synchronized electronic subtitles, and has been working as a full-time freelance subtitler since 1997. Lía is largely self-taught and learned her craft during the early days of the field. This was before formal audiovisual translation education was widely available. Lía has collaborated with every major distributor in Spain, translating everything from major blockbusters to all sorts of interesting indies, while also working closely with film festivals. In recent years, she has expanded her expertise to include dubbing translation. Her exceptional work has earned industry recognition, including a nomination from the Spanish Association for Audiovisual Translation and Adaptation for her subtitles of Nebraska in 2014, and winning her award for Spotlight in 2016. Thank you, Lía, for taking the time and talking to us.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
So you have an impressive career spanning for almost 3 decades in audiovisual translation.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about yourself? So what made you decide to become a subtitler?
It was purely by accident. While I was studying journalism, I signed up to volunteer at the International Film Festival of Madrid, writing a supplement the national newspaper gave about the activities of the festival every day. It was really funny. I was one day at the screenings, and the translation of the films then was done by simultaneous translation. So they didn't have subtitled copies because they were for the festival. And one day I was around the theater and someone said, "You speak English, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I do." "Okay, we need someone to translate this." And I suddenly found myself in a simultaneous translation cabin, doing the simultaneous translation for the Muppets Take Manhattan, which was jumping in the deep end. Funnily enough, that didn't scare me away, and I started working with Filmoteca Española, with the people who were doing the electronic subtitles for them, and working with them at the Filmoteca and also at different film festivals. And from then on, I jumped to start to do commercial translations for subtitling as well.
Well, so that is totally accidental.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, really interesting. So since you've been translated over hundreds of movies, so do you have some translations that is most memorable for you?
I'm not really sure if there's one that would stand out among all of them, but I generally enjoy doing stuff that makes me that has research associated to it, which is one of the things that has changed so much since I started. It was the first days of the internet. There was much less content available online, so you had to do your research. And so I'm curious, and I'm always looking into things. I could say that, for example, I did the first couple of seasons for Stranger Things,
Mm-hmm.
and I really enjoyed that because I grew up in that version of the United States. I speak English because I lived there when I was a kid, and those were the years I was living there. And then I changed. I went back to Spain, and so those were also the years. So I had the both worlds and the vocabulary for both worlds, for pre-teenage American kid and pre-teenage Spanish kid.
Oh, so you kind of feel the connection
Yeah.
between the two language and also between the days you were living in America and you're living in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is quite memorable, I believe. Yes. So nowadays, do you still encounter difficulties when you are translating?
Yes, of course, definitely.
Mm.
Apart from the obvious, which is most translators struggle with, which is when you have a film about juries and trials and with a lot of legal vocabulary or medical vocabulary or scientific vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and talking about that, when you do science fiction, there's really many of those films are world creating, so they make up stuff, they invent devices and places and people and names for things, and then
Mm-hmm.
and that's something you have to be very careful with and study quite a bit to get right. And then I think one of the biggest challenges for any audiovisual translator is that you're working with, more so than many other translators, you're working with a type of language that's very alive, that changes quite a bit. So it's obviously you can't use the latest slang that's been being spoken in the streets, because then you alienate a great part of the public, because they don't understand that. Only the people that use that very specific slang would understand it. But you do have to have an ear for what has permeated and how the language has changed and how people would say things. And so it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
sound old-fashioned.
Okay, so you still think that is very challenging.
I think that keeps you on your toes. You have to be, you can't get stuck and just translate stuff like when you were 13 and have characters speaking like when you were 13. No, you have to have them speaking like 13-year-olds when the film is happening, when the action in the film is happening.
Okay. And you started to translate for dubbing script in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
So how does translating for dubbing differ from translating for subtitles?
Um, I think the technique is different. For subtitles, you're very focused on condensing and extracting the maximum amount of information in the minimum amount of
Mm-hmm.
words. So, and that requires a technique, and it's something that you can be good at it to begin with, but you learn it, and it's and an experience brings you a whole set of tools to be able to do that. And for dubbing, you obviously have the lip sync problem,
Yeah.
which in Spain and for Spanish translators, the translators usually aren't too worried about that. So there's an adjuster that comes after the translator that takes care of the lip sync. So you're not absolutely focused on that, but you do take it into account. And what I found is that in a sense, it's a bit freer. You can take more liberties with the translation, as long as it's not a mistranslation and you convey the meaning. You've got a bit of more, you can be a bit more creative, actually, without making stuff up, but you can be a bit more creative.
So you mean in Spain, the people who are translating the dubbing script and the one who are adapting the dubbing script are two groups of people?
Yeah, some translators are also adapters, or some adapters are also translators. So some people do the two functions, and but in general, there's the translator, and then the adapter picks it up, and then there might even be a director for the dubbing.
So you are doing the translating job, or just
I'm not an adapter. I just translate.
okay. So you don't need to sacrifice the meaning or something for the lip sync.
No, but I do take it into account sometimes,
Mhm.
mainly when there's a very when it's a close up and you can clearly see people's lips, and you can always stop and think about options that will fit in better than others.
All right. And you translated for both blockbusters and indies. So
Mhm.
indies are the independent films typically have smaller budgets. So are there any differences between translating for blockbuster movies and the movies with smaller budgets?
I think when you approach the translation as a translator, I don't think that that's what makes the difference. I think the biggest difference comes from a good script or a bad one. Usually the dialogue been done by the screenwriters, and if they've done a good job, it's usually a pleasure to translate it because they've done that job before. If the script isn't really well thought out and the dialogues aren't, then that gives us more problems as a translator. Sometimes you don't even know what the intention or why screenwriters have written stuff. And maybe sometimes it just happens that in the final editing, something that made sense in the script because everything was there. When it gets to the editing, they cut stuff out and suddenly the dialogues don't make sense because there's something missing from before or something missing afterwards. So I wouldn't say it's there's much of a difference. If the script is good, it's always a pleasure to translate it.
Yeah, so the original text is always very important.
Yeah.
So do you still receive the English template from the agency or from the
I in general, yes, for theatrical releases, you do have all the materials, but I've worked with I've for festivals that's not always possible, so sometimes I just work from hearing the film, the dialogue, and doing the transcription translation at the same time.
Okay, so when you receive the template, usually the spotting is locked, right?
For subtitles, it is, yes.
So you cannot change the
In some
in queue, out
cases,
queue.
in some cases I can. In general, it's very much locked. You can't change stuff. And I can't speak about what the project is, but right now, this morning, I was working on a project and I was thinking if they had done this template in a different way, it would be so much better for the translation, but I couldn't touch it.
Okay, so if you can change it, you prefer to have this kind of
Yeah, to a degree. I understand that for international releases, they need everything to be very standardized and the same in every language. So that's why we all receive the same template, and changing the template for each language might cause problems for all the processes that have to go afterwards. But I mean, the ideal scenario would be making the template myself. I've when I began to work, that's the way you did it. You did the spotting yourself, and it's not cheating, but since you're going to be the Spanish translator, when you're hearing it, you know that it's best if you cut here because that's what's going to serve the translation better than if I cut in this other place or whatever.
And you mentioned that you were largely self-taught since formal subtitling education didn't exist when you studied.
Yeah.
But now that European universities offer master's program in audiovisual translation, so have you worked with graduates from these programs?
Not that I have, because I do QAs, I do proofing of other people's work as well. So I've come across people that I can tell that are newer to, not because they're worse, not because the translation is bad, but they don't have the resources or the tools that I was talking about which come from experience for condensing so I have come across some work
Yes.
from people who have gone through schools.
Yeah, so except for the experience, have you noticed any differences in
I
skills or approach between the
I think
newer?
they are much better prepared technically.
Mm-hmm.
So they are learning things that you just learned from trial and error. I learned from trial and error,
Mm-hmm.
and they come out knowing that stuff, and like all the technical parameters for subtitles, for example. It's and even for punctuation rules and stuff. Not just the ones that pertain to Spanish grammar, but the ones that are the conventions that are used in subtitling, so they know when to use ellipses and when to use italics instead of so those things. I think they're much better at that. They come out knowing that stuff.
Okay, so you're happy to see that there are more and more programs in audiovisual translation in Europe, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah,
I think this might be an unpopular opinion. I think there are too many.
there are
I
too
think,
many.
yeah, I think that it's this is a much bigger issue of universities becoming for-profit organizations and for students becoming clients and consumers and then expecting. So I don't know if I think it would probably be best to have it concentrated so that not everybody could. I'm not really not that into it. I'm not a teacher at any of these schools. I don't know. I think what they do is good because I can tell from people who are coming out that they do their job good. But there's something I think which will probably tie into something we'll talk about later is that what will the job market look like for audiovisual translators in the future.
So we will talk about this later.
Mm-hmm.
And and then I want to ask you a few questions about creativity and technology. So what is creativity in translation for you?
I always say that I do not have a novel in me. I'm not a writer. I can't write. I'll never be able to write a novel. I really enjoy them. I read them. I'm a great reader, but I can do a great translation of a novel. I can't do that. So I think taking that as an idea, what it means is that translation has a limited creativity because you're working with a pre-existing material and you have to be faithful to it. At the same time, you should be faithful to, since this is audiovisual translation, you should be faithful to not necessarily how things should be said or expressed, but how things are really expressed in the real world in everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I find you can get into the creativity of things. And the creative process for me there is inhabiting every character, putting myself in their shoes and thinking, if I were this person in this place and in this situation, how would I say things in Spanish?
Okay. And also, audiovisual translation is a very special format of translation, right? So I'm wondering, do you think the constraints, for example, the reading speed constraints, can constrain the creativity or promote the creativity?
That's a good question, and I think it's both.
Yeah,
I
it's both.
think it does constrain at certain points. You just can't put the information in there, even if the information is in the original, you just can't put it into the translation.
Mm-hmm.
And you just hope for the best and hope that the choice you've made to cut out half of the information,
Mm-hmm.
the choice that you've left in the half that was more relevant. But I think it also helps because, and it helps a lot with bad scripts. You can
Mm-hmm.
improve a bad script with a good translation.
Okay. By cutting the information off.
Oh, by rewriting the information.
Okay.
The same thing I was talking about inhabiting the characters. Maybe the screenwriter hasn't inhabited that character that well, but you realize from all the other cues you have from the film that character would in fact would say this way, not that way. And even though in the original they've made him say this, he really should be saying that in the original, and you can make him say that in the translation. So
yeah, so it's like both promote and constrain the creativity. Yeah. Okay. And your translation of Nebraska has been nominated in the Spanish Association for Audiovisual Translation and Adaptation. Do you still remember your creative process when translating that subtitling script?
A bit, I do. I was really happy to be nominated for that film because it's a very, there's not a lot of, there's not that much to translate in that film. There's a lot of silences in that film, so they don't speak that much. And so, and everything is very simple. Everything that happens and everything, and very gentle. Staying true to the characters didn't call for big fireworks or for making them speak in either being very witty or very outspoken, or it was them, and they were characterized by their dialogues, and it was subtle. It was subtle, and I really like that. I was really happy with that nomination because I think it came through in the translation that I did.
And you started working as a freelancer at the end of last century. So how has technology changed the way you work compared to when you started in 1997?
It's changed a lot. we worked with physical products, so not just the 35mm film, which we worked with, and even the spotting process was the timing process was very physical. You had a wheel connected to a beta tape, and it was physical. And then you would also receive everything in paper, and so that part has changed a lot. Now we're working on platforms, and everything is digital, obviously.
So email wasn't popular at that time.
Not yet. It was starting, but not yet. So you would get a call, and you would get a delivery, and you would get a messenger bringing the materials home. What has changed the most, but that's almost anecdotal. It's just from physical to digital. What has really changed is the internet has changed the way, the speed at which you can translate, because you have all the information at your fingertips, sometimes in both of the languages you're using, or in even more, and that has changed very, very much. It has made us more productive. It has also sped things up quite a bit. So you couldn't get so many things done in the same time. So that also allowed for a slower pace, which I think is good.
So you think the internet makes you more productive? Do you think machine translation can have the same effect?
Yeah. The thing is that being more productive doesn't necessarily mean producing better translations, both in for humans and for machines. It's not yeah, it does. I mean, the only answer to that is yes.
Okay.
Machine translation is makes you more productive.
So how do you feel machine translation has affected the translation field, and has it had any impact on your own creative process?
It's affected, I think it's affected everyone. It's probably affected more, and it has been for many years, more technical translations first, because those are easier to replicate and to produce with machine translation. So there'll be less errors. In my case, I've been seeing machine translation for the past 5, 6 as an aide for the past 5, 6, 7 years. I'm not sure. It's improving. It's better and better each time. I haven't been that affected because the kind of things I translate. So distributors and streamers are still relying on human translation for their translations. So nobody has asked me to use machine translation for the work I do.
Okay, so it hasn't had any effect on your creative process because you haven't used it already yet.
I've used it for products that sometimes I've translated stuff that the owners take less care with or don't care or sometimes I've been offered it as a guide. So you don't have to use it. We are not judging you if you're using it, but this is what the machine has come up with. If you want, you can use what the machine has come up with. So I have been following it in that regard, even though I haven't been using it.
Okay. And some people said they are using machine translation for brainstorming. Do you think it can help you to brainstorm about the solution?
I'm sure it can. I've done it, but I think you have to, in a sense, have the solution in your brain to begin with, even if you can't find it. So I'll explain what I mean. I mean that you have to know what you're talking about. And you have to know that the solution that's being presented, all the ramifications and all it can imply. And so if you leave everything, even your own knowledge, in the hands of the machine, you're definitely losing something. You can acquire knowledge through the machine and as another source of acquiring knowledge, but there has to be something in you.
So some professionals worry that AI might replace human translators in subtitling and dubbing. So do you see AI as a threat or a tool for translators?
Again, it's both. It is a threat. I mean, it will take over a lot of translations. Having said that, I don't use AI for translations, among other things, because of the NDAs I have to sign, so I can't. The way I receive materials doesn't. I wouldn't even think about it, but I'm also bound by contract not to use it on the materials I receive. So I have to say I'm not experimenting with it for my work because I feel it would be dishonest to be serious. But yes, I think AI will take over a lot of the audiovisual translation, and I think it could help audiovisual translation as well.
So to be more productive.
Yep, which is ridiculous because the problem with upping the productivity with the same rates as 20 years ago means that you are receiving the same amount of money for much more hours of work, which is what has happened in translation in general. And I mean, all translators will agree with this.
So this is the end of the interview. Thank you, Lía, again for taking time and talking with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you again to our invited speaker, and to our listeners. Thank you for being there, and feel free to share our podcasts with your family, friends, and colleagues. This is part of a series of podcasts of the EU-funded INCREC project. So follow us for more episodes, and please share your comments on this platform. See you next time.